Good evening, everyone. St. Xavier's College, Autonomous Kolkata, Internal Quality Assurance Cell, and Academic Council welcomes you back to a two-day national webinar titled Pandemics and Natural Disasters, Understanding and Coping. We will again start today's session with a short prayer song by Stuti Borua, a student from the BSc Department of Microbiology.
There is a candle in every soul, some brightly burning, some dark and cold. There is a spirit who brings a fire, ignites a candle, and makes his home. So carry your candle, run to the darkness, seek out the helpless, confused and alone. Hold out your candle for all to see it. Take your candle, go light your world. Take your candle, go light your world. Frustrated brother, see how he's tried to light his own candle some other way. See now your sister, she's been robbed and lied to, still holds a candle without a flame. So carry your candle, run to the darkness, seek out the helpless, confused and alone. Hold out your candle for all to see it. Take your candle, go light your world. Take your candle, go light your world. We are a family whose hearts are blazing. So let's raise our candles, light up the sky, praying to our Father. In the name of Jesus, make us a beacon in darkest times. So carry your candle, run to the darkness, seek out the helpless, deceived and poor. Hold out your candle for all to see it. Take your candle, go light your world.
Now, I request Dr. Parthopratim Ghosh, coordinator of the Internal Quality Assurance Cell, to deliver his welcome speech.
Thank you, Ankita. Respected Father Principal, Reverend Dr. Dominic Savio, Jesuit fathers and sisters, resource persons, Professor Ajitabu Raichaudhuri, Professor Achin Chakraborty, participating and attending dignitaries, members of the Academic Council, Secretary Dr. Arun Chandra, members of IQAC, professors, and dear students. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to today's session of the national webinar, Pandemics and Natural Disasters, Understanding and Coping. Inspired by the leadership of our principal, Reverend Dr. Dominic Savio, we made a humble attempt to organize this webinar, and today is the second day where we would witness luminaries from the academic world who would enlighten us with their rich insights regarding pandemics and natural disasters, scourges that we are presently trying to grapple with. Pandemics and natural disasters are similar in the sense that both emanate from the fury of nature. While pandemics are characterized as new diseases for which people do not have immunity, and those that spread across the world beyond expectation, natural disasters, though sometimes predictable, have an equally uncertain outcome because we often fail to fathom their depths and severity. As in a war, the most vulnerable are the worst affected. Such occurrences are not new to the world. The history of pandemics goes at least as far back as 541-42 AD, when the world experienced the plague of the Justinian, and some of the worst include the Black Deaths of 1346-53, which probably led to the genesis of quarantine. Then came the outbreak of smallpox in Europe, spreading across Asia, Arabia, and later on to Mexico and United States in the 15th century. Cholera in the mid-19th century England, and later again in India and the developing world. In recent years, we have witnessed episodes of the Spanish flu during 1918-20, the swine flu, and even the human immunodeficiency virus. Natural disasters have shaken the world again and again. We often witness cyclones and hurricanes, floods, and cloudbursts, such as the debacle at Uttarakhand. In West Bengal, we have been hit by the twin shells of coronavirus and cyclone Amphan. In both pandemics and natural disasters, we often do not know how to deal with the emergent situation. The world, however, has survived, and we have learned from past experiences. But it is an ongoing process as these dark phases come back in a variety of mutated forms. And so the process of learning and understanding continues. And with the blessings of the Almighty, we hope to ride the storm as in earlier occasions. Pandemics and natural disasters have immediate effects on the economy, as also far-reaching consequences. Universal basic income is badly affected. Consumption and consumer confidence decline. Along with this, business expectations are at a low level, depressing investment. Supply chains are disrupted. Income inequalities may worsen. There are myriad effects on the population at various levels of age, gender, and asset ownership. Displacement of a large section of workers in both formal and informal sectors leads to the threat of food security and compromises their entitlement to a decent life. The economics of health comes to occupy the center stage as we experience its linkage with the rest of the economy. Models integrating epidemiology, macroeconomics, and sector level activities are constructed to assess, forecast, and design possible policies to combat such disruptions. This afternoon, we have with us two distinguished academicians, Professor Ajitabh Raychaudhuri of Jadavpur University and Professor Achin Chakraborty, Director, Institute of Development Studies, Kolkata, who are well known globally for their erudition in the field of economics. We thank Professor Raychaudhuri and Professor Chakraborty for being with us in spite of their busy schedules. Since the subject of economics deals with the study of mankind in the ordinary business of life, we would immensely benefit from the inputs that our speakers are going to provide us in understanding and coping with pandemics and natural disasters. Thank you and welcome one and all.
Thank you, Dr. Parthapratim Ghosh, for your such wonderful welcome speech. Now, I request Dr. Shashwati Choudhury, Professor of Economics in the Commerce Morning section, St. Xavier's College, Kolkata, to formally introduce our first speaker, Professor Ajitabu Rai Choudhury.
Thank you, Ankita. We are extremely happy to have amongst us Professor Ajitabu Roy Choudhury. Professor Roy Choudhury is a professor of the Department of Economics, Jadavpur University. Presently, he is a chair professor, Planning and Development Unit, funded by Niti Aayog. Professor Roy Choudhury completed his PhD in economics from the American University, Washington, D.C., USA, and the topic of his thesis was Models of Redistribution and Economic Development. His areas of specialization and teaching is trade and development issues facing the developing countries and macroeconomics. He had been awarded the Shikhar Ratna Award for Outstanding Teacher, Government of West Bengal 2018. He had been a Fulbright Fellow in the Yale University and also the Reed Hall Resident Scholar in Columbia University. In past capacities, he had served as the coordinator of the Center for Advanced Studies, Department of Economics, Jadavpur University, and also the joint coordinator of the Social Science Program under UGC-funded UPE2 program from 2013 to 2019. Professor Roy Choudhury had authored 8 books like India's Exports, an analytical study from Oxford University Press, and International Trade in Services in India, Implications for Growth and Inequality in a Globalizing World, also from Oxford University Press. He has also written innumerable research articles in many national and international journals like Singapore Economic Review, the Japanese Economic Review, Journal of Quantitative Economics, Journal of Economic Development, Journal of Developing Areas, Economic and Political Weekly, and Journal of International Trade and Economic Development. Sir has also written many articles in Bengali magazines and newspapers like A Shuman. We are really happy to have you amidst us, sir. Sir, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Shashwati, for a very generous introduction. Am I audible? Is it clear?
Yes.
Okay. In fact, it's a pleasure and privilege to be invited here to address all of you. And in fact, all of us are in an unprecedented situation. In fact, most of the time we are confined at our home and in fact facing lots of questions from students, what to do and interacting with them. So as Partho introduced in the beginning, that the world has changed. It's not only a health problem to begin with, it was, and then obviously it was a health contagion, but it affected us in many different ways. And economy is no exception to that. And it started with a contagion, health contagion, but it finally evolved into what one can say an economic contagion, which has affected the whole world, all parts of the world in different degrees. And India is no exception to that. I will largely confine myself to India, and I will bring in maybe the world wherever it's necessary for us to understand its relation with India and whether India can benefit from the interaction with the world in terms of world trade and in the future, whether the world opens up some prospects for us apart from what's happening inside the domestic economy. Now, let me start with the simple fact that this year, this financial year, we call it 2020-21, was preceded by the financial year 2019-20. And we already saw a very ominous signs in the economy, in the sense that the just published growth scenario or growth records of Indian economy put the Indian growth down from a projected 7% to 4%. In other words, the national cake was supposed to grow from, say, 100 to 107. It has grown to 104. So whatever plan was there had to cut short by something like a quantity 3 for every 100. And you can easily imagine that our economy is a 200 lakh crores economy. So naturally, how much is the difference between what we planned during the last year and what we achieved? On top of that, we have this unprecedented COVID-19 scenario. So it's almost like we were down in some sense. And on top of that, we had a blow. So in fact, that's a tremendous economic crisis for us for the time being. And as you know, that all of us have seen that from the lockdown scenario, which started in March, mid-March, I'd say, the worst affected were daily laborers. They were all around. We saw pictures of them. They were just out of their work. And there's a lot of hue and cry about migrant labor, because after all, India right now survives on migrant labor. In fact, migrant labor works in agricultural seasons. Migrant labor works in different industrial belt, as well as in different service sectors. So a lot of focus was there on migrant labor because they were left in the lurch. But at the same time, not everybody is a migrant labor. A lot of labor works inside their own region. So say for West Bengal state, there's a lot of labor, daily labor, both in industrial sector or agriculture or service sector, who stayed back in West Bengal itself. They suffered also. So there's all around, there is a great deal of loss of jobs for daily labor. I'm mentioning daily labor to begin with because they are the most vulnerable sections. They don't have social security. They earn their living by day-to-day work. It's not guaranteed, like what we can call protected sector, organized sector, protected, having social security. In a sense, within that sector also there is some kind of a blow. Some people got their salary cut, did not get their salaries. But after all, there's a lot more protection than what we get for the daily labor. So the question was, on top of what the economy was not at its best, and then the COVID-19 came, and there's so much loss of jobs, loss of income. Uncertainty has grown, multiple times than what we had in the last year. So what could be done about it? Unprecedented situation. And so what's the way out? Now, if you look around the world, one common thing which came out, especially in the West, after all, United States, the richest economy in the world, was severely hit. The whole of European Union was severely hit. Some of the East Asian countries like Japan, ultimately, to a certain extent, some Southeast Asian countries, where I would say is prosperous countries in terms of wealth. The common policy which came to the mind of everybody was typically Keynesian policy. The people have lost their incomes, so there is a dearth of demand. People start, just not demanding their daily necessities and non-essential goods as well, because people do not survive on essentials alone. People survive on a variety of goods right now. So what one needs to do is to boost up the sagging aggregate demand, because if you have a lower aggregate demand, then the economy gets a hit. And it's important for Indian economy too, because last year when the economy was facing a fall in the growth from 7% to 4%, all the major industries, say auto industry, steel industry, textile industry, the big ones in India, they were all saying that, look, we had so much stock which was unsold. Inventory accumulation, unplanned inventory accumulation really was tremendous. Why was it happening? So we had a problem of aggregate demand to begin with. So initial point from which the COVID, we start talking about COVID, the initial situation, the initial point already had a problem of aggregate demand. So it's quite natural, this problem of aggregate demand, the shortage of demand in the economy, went up leaps and bounds, basically, once the COVID affected the economy. Now, the point is, if the typical Keynesian prescription, you know, the John Maynard Keynes, they prescribed in 1929, when the depression hit, it's somewhat kind of a similar situation. People lost jobs, it's economic malady. We have additional malady here, which is not there in depression. It's the health contagion which has affected us. So it's more complex. But nonetheless, people were not buying things. They have lost their income. So push up the demand in the economy, because that was creating a problem. And India, as I already said, had this problem. And one must remember that we cannot compartmentalize the Indian economy, for that matter, any economy, in typical textbook style that, look, this is agriculture, this is industry, this is services. Most of the demand, I won't say most, but probably it's a major part of the demand, is services, demand in the services sector, call it logistics, transportation, maintenance service, sales, retail sales, the repair service, financial service, which generate a lot of income as well as employment in the economy. They depend on the industrial sector. If industry produces, the manufacturing sector produces, they need transportation service. They need retail sales. They need repair services. So you provide, jobs in service sector, provided these manufacturing activities are there. So they are, very much interrelated. Cannot really talk that in terms of that boost up the services sector, leaving the manufacturing there. It doesn't happen. And the manufacturing sector was suffering tremendously. Agriculture, not so much, fortunately enough, because agricultural sector had good monsoons, essential goods were there, demanded more or less. There were, sectoral shortages, even some sectors. Manufacturing sector was hit. So was the services, because many of the, so this is a complex situation. So when we say about the aggregate demand has to be boosted up, manufacturing plays a crucial role. A crucial role is a center point. If the manufacturing sector is not boosted, then even the services sector will not, get the filling. The sales will not pick up, maintenance activities will not pick up, transportation will not pick up, which provides a lot of jobs. Even tourism and other things depends on the income which is generated in the manufacturing sector. Be it organized or be it unorganized. Even I don't want to distinguish the two very much nowadays, because given the kind of industrial structure organization which we have, there is interlinkage, subcontract, fragmentation. So not every manufacturing unit produces A to Z. Lot of things are, subcontracted out. And many of this in Indian scenario goes to small, medium, and some of them, and many of them, I would say, are in the unorganized sector. The advantage being you do not fall within the so-called labor laws. People talk so much about labor laws, but the industry has a way out to that already. They have gone to the unorganized sector industries, and some of them official, some of them unofficial. I don't want to go into that. And they do not face the labor laws. So whatever we talk about labor laws, it's much hyped thing. It's already bypassed. by the manufacturing sector to a large. So let me come back to the point of aggregate demand. Why was there when economy was not in COVID scenario, aggregate demand was lagging? Very simple thing is, the driving force of any economy nowadays in this kind of society is the consumer, is the household. If the household doesn't spend, your consumer demand is low. That has a ripple effect on the investment demand too, on capital formation, on all kinds of things, especially in the private sector. And remember, the industrial activity, manufacturing is largely controlled, largely. In fact, the lion's share of manufacturing is in private sector. So naturally, what happens if the consumer demand is low, households do not demand, it affects the manufacturing sector. Their investment becomes low too. Why was this scenario that the households were not demanding, even when there was no COVID? And after COVID, the already low household demand turned into its lowest. Why was this problem? Two things are important here, I would say. One thing is uncertainty. In fact, in our textbooks, we always talk about in macroeconomic scenario. We are talking about the aggregate economy, aggregate demand. In the macroeconomic scenario, we do not talk much about uncertainty. Everything we talk about, that the economy, the household's demand is based on income or at best rate of interest, something like that. Even we have two periods model and etc. So today we consume thinking about tomorrow. So obviously all these things are accommodated in various ways, but uncertainty is somewhat bypassed. It's talked in our micro scenario, individual household, yes. But when you take all the household and talk about aggregate demand, not much uncertainty and all these things come in. But remember, if there is a lot of uncertainty, and in fact, Indian economy, the so-called unorganized sector mainly, and even in organized sector, jobs increasingly became, in fact, in unorganized sector, it is always casual in nature. You don't have really very organized jobs in the sense that you have a piece of paper which is legally tenable, and you have social security, all these pensions and etc. granted, never existed. But even in the organized sector, which is roughly say 15% of the economy, leaving aside the government sector, which is say something like 2-3%, the rest is all private sector in the organized sector. Even in organized sector, the jobs increasingly has become casual in nature, renewable every year. It's not the kind of permanent jobs which we thought about. And given that India is increasingly dragged into globalization, so naturally it's not Indian domestic scenario alone. The world scenario, etc., had a big role to play. Last year, we had this uncertainty which prevailed in the world economy, world trade, in fact, since we had this US-China tremendous trade war going on. And then we have in Europe this Brexit uncertainty. The world had uncertainty already. So India, largely within the Indian economy, uncertainty in terms of job security was not at the same level which we had 10 years back. World trade was passing through some kind of uncertainty. So there is external uncertainty. So whoever is connected with external trade in some sense or other, they had uncertainty too. So uncertainty went up. And if you have uncertainty in the economy, those households who are lower down in the economy, in terms of the income distribution, they become very cautious. So if they get, say, even 100 rupee, they have to think twice whether they will go for more spending or they will save. So that's the important thing which I want to bring. Suppose you push in a lot of money. That's what people are saying, that Indian government has committed something like 1% of their GDP to direct transfer or some kind of direct benefits. The rest is largely divided into monetary policy. I will come to that later. Monetary policy is something like Reserve Bank of India has stepped in, increased the amount of liquidity in the banks, increased the way the economy can have more liquid funds, either through banks or non-bank financial corporations or non-bank financial companies. And then the third thing which they did is economic reform, push economic reform, agricultural reform. Have the farmers go more to the market, get the benefit, you privatize the power sector, and so on and so forth. But the main point is 1%. Whereas people talk about, say, in European Union, they have committed more than 10% as some kind of a direct benefits to the households, either directly to the households or to the small and medium industries who really provide the jobs. They ensured 3 months salary, wages. Even if the persons are not employed, they will get it, the government will bear it. USA had the same thing, direct money transfer. They committed something like 10%. India is committing 1%. Is it enough? I'm not going into that. Certainly you can increase it, and you can calculate instead of 1%, we could have committed something like 5%. Fine, no problem. Remember, Indian economy is already passing through some kind of very strong or very narrow fiscal band in which they can play around. But as everybody is saying, that if you look around fiscal band, it's a question of life and death. So economy, technical fiscal deficit, fiscal bands, etc., immaterial. Life is more important. Suppose you put in more money into people's hands. Instead of 1%, you make it 5%. Will people spend? As I'm trying to tell, that even when there was no COVID, people are not spending. Some of the major industry was accumulating funds, be it somewhat higher up in the income distribution, or most important, those who are lower down in the income distribution, they become cautious. So even if you put in more money, will that go into the market, and the demand will pick up? In case of uncertainty, if you put in simple macroeconomic model of a consumption function, etc., no guarantee that when the uncertainty has gone up, aggregate demand will be boosted today. What people are talking about, you must boost up your aggregate demand today so that the manufacturing activities picks up again, because people had stopped spending. So, and remember, for every 100 rupees nowadays, it's almost like 60 rupees go to non-food items. And that's very important. People spend not only on food, but they spend on non-food items. And that's the backbone of the manufacturing, proliferation of this manufacturing sector in the Indian economy. So given this scenario, even if you put in more money, I'm not sure that the current demand, given the increase in uncertainty, will go up by the multiplier which we talk in terms of Keynesian economics. It might be much less. So that's an important thing. So if 5% in the standard scenario, you calculate that 1% increase to 5%, maybe if you increase uncertainty, it has to go up 3 times more. And the government simply is not in a position to bear it. The second point which I want to say, and I already touched upon this, income distribution in urban areas has worsened over the last 7-8 years. Worsened. So every 100 rupees, if you take, make a division, which kind of people are getting it? Rich, upper middle, lower middle, low income. The income distribution in terms of any coefficient you mention it. Gini is the most common. And there are other better coefficients which we can talk about. Clearly has worsened in urban areas. Urbanization is proceeding quite fast in India. And in fact, not only urban areas, rural areas also, the consumerism has spread. Markets have spread in urban, semi-urban, etc. Income distribution has worsened. And all of us know, and it's typical textbook scenario, those who are lower down in income distribution, they are the majority in terms of households. They spend a lot more as percentage of their income than those who are rich or upper middle class. So if I get, say, 100 rupees more and I belong to rich or upper middle class, I might go to buy gold. I might put my money in some, in the rich do that in Indian economy. They open up accounts in foreign shores. They buy real estates in even foreign countries, or in some of this, just lock it up in land or somewhere else. It doesn't come back to the economy. It doesn't help the Indian economy. So if the income distribution has worsened, that's one of the reasons why the aggregate demand in India has become lower over time, because you don't put in money to those who spend more from their income. You have put in money in the hands of those who do not spend in and circulate the money within the economy. They lock it up in somewhere where the economy doesn't get the benefit. That's a reason nobody really talks too much, except that, say, Professor Kaushik Basu has raised this, Piketty has raised this, income distribution. We do not talk much in terms of income distribution these days in India, but that's a very important determining factor. So even if you try to increase your aggregate demand, these two factors, uncertainty and worsening income distribution, are barriers to that. That's the first point. Second point is the investment. Say private investment in textbook depends on, if you lower the rate of interest in banks, and that's exactly the whole idea of monetary policy. Almost the whole package which we have announced, something like people talk about, to the tune of 20 lakhs crores or something package. Almost 17-18% of that revolves around monetary policy. Roughly put more money in the banks, lower the rate of interest, as if you do that, the investors will run to you, start taking money. And I would say most important is the small and medium industries, because they are the job creators. They are the job creators. So they will run to you and start investment. First of all, the aggregate demand uncertain. You do not know, even if you push in more money, the aggregate demand will put. Essential goods, yes. We didn't have a problem in essential goods. We have a problem in the other varieties, non-food, and that's the major part of the economy right now. That really dragged down the economic activity for the moment. Ethical part apart, I'm not talking about ethics, I'm talking about the reality, the driving engine in the Indian economy, the non-food sector. So investment, rate of interest, as you know, in most of the developed countries, look at the whole of European Union, United States or Japan, negative almost, zero. You take money, you don't pay any interest. People are not taking it. If the world is uncertain in front of you, would you take money, expand your factory, set up a new factory? Would you do that? If you calculate that the future is uncertain, you will never do it, even if you lower the interest rate. And the Indian government has put so much emphasis on putting money in the banking sector and increasing the liquidity, as well as non-bank financial companies. So who will take the loans? Who will invest? One is this industrial sector. The other is basically where the Indian government has a lot of hope. Households will start borrowing money and invest in real estates, housing. That's one of the big sector where if you invest, a lot of jobs are created in unskilled workers for that. That's absolutely true. But even the households, when they're uncertain, as I said, even those households who work in highly paid sector, if jobs become uncertain because for various reasons, and you have a yearly renewal, kind of a non-permanent nature tagged to your job, in this kind of a scenario which we are right now we are having, even if your rate of interest goes down a lot, will they borrow money and invest in real estates? In fact, that's big question. So investors unlikely to rush. Those who will rush, this is a question of adverse selection and moral hazard sort of question. Those who will rush to the banks, there is a likelihood that they are not real investors. They are fake investors. India has witnessed so many cases of fake investors, absolutely immoral investors. They might rush first to take this advantage of this. So banks have become absolutely wary. They just don't want to lend. They're scared that if they lend, they will have tremendous problem later on getting their money back, and non-performing assets will go up and the vigilance will come, and everybody is sitting on that. So neither there is strong demand for this extra liquidity which you have created, nor there is a strong supply in the market from the viewpoint of the banks. So it's a peculiar scenario. So whatever the government thought about putting so much emphasis on monetary policy, and monetary policy is not putting direct money, not transferring money to you. It's a circuitous route. It's an indirect way. Investor will get the money, will set up something, then we will get a job, then we will get income. It's not direct, it takes time. So it's a questionable thing. The aggregate demand has components like consumption, as I said, might pick up a little bit, essential goods, etc. Non-food sector, the majority, I'm not sure how much it will pick up. Investment, somewhat doubtful. So the third sector left is government spending. And here, as we find in every recession and depression, the government has to play a major role in terms of investment. In fact, government's major role is to create infrastructure. And we know that if you look around the world history, the government infrastructure spending created lots of income, mainly for, say, unskilled workers, who are the most vulnerable section in the society. And this infrastructure creation, now all of us know there's tremendous scope. We talk about physical infrastructure. We need road, we need sports, we need power, we need easy access to land, etc. Granted. But there now we understand so much is needed in the social infrastructure too. So much. The COVID crisis has brought to the fore the problem of lack of social infrastructure. Hospitals, public health, etc. Achin will talk a lot more about it. He's an expert on this. And this problem is not only India's. This problem is a world problem. Every country is now finding the gap between supply and demand in case of public health. So government has a big role to play. And hopefully the government of India, they have announced number of things here. And they will bring it up. Less red tapeism, less bureaucracy, less corruption in some sense or other, less political influence. The economy will go forward just with a single thing in mind, that this is essential at the moment to pull up the economy from the gutter in which they are. There are supply side shocks too. As you know, the migrant labor has come back, so nobody knows whether they will go back or not. These are short-term shocks. In the longer term, this will not be a problem. Short term, there is a problem of supply side. So even if you want to open up factories, you will not get it. But there are other problems too, like getting raw materials. We have problems with China, and we have problems world around. So getting raw materials for some of the automobile sector, pharmaceutical sectors, creating real trouble of getting raw materials. So there is some supply side shocks, but I think the short-term shocks we will get over it. The long-term problem of supply side, we call what is called the growth issue. I'm coming to that in a moment. Before that, I just touch upon the trade. Peculiar scenario has emerged. India always had a deficit in its trade. We bought a lot more from abroad. Our import was a lot more than our export. So we had a current account deficit, which was met by foreign direct investment. Investors came, lend us money, and we met our deficit in the current account, export, import in goods and services, by investment. Now we have a surplus in our current account. Why? Because export has fallen and import has fallen a lot more than exports. So if you take export minus import, all of a sudden we have a surplus. What happens, what we mean by surplus? that India has more dollars to lend abroad than what they need from abroad. A deficit in current account really means buying more from abroad than what we are selling. So we need dollars. Now we have current account surplus. So apparently, theoretically, we have more dollars too, which we should. We are sitting on that. Unfortunately, whenever there is a current account surplus, the standard textbook theory says our rupee should be stronger, because obviously we have lots of dollars. Dollar supply has gone up. Anything which supply goes up in market. So potato supply goes up, potato price goes down. So dollar supply goes up, dollar prices go down relative to rupee. Didn't happen. When there is a lot of current account surplus, the standard theory says that we need the rate of interest will be pushed up, because this extra money which comes in will ultimately turn into, there should be, there's a need for the rate of interest to be higher, because we do not need money from abroad. Apparently, because we are sitting on more dollars than what we require. But this is the puzzle. We do need a lot of investment from abroad, but our current account is in surplus. It's surplus for the wrong reason. Our import has gone down because our economy has slowed down so much. So we do not need parts and component that much. We do not need finished products to import. Petroleum, oil import, all of a sudden dipped like anything because the buses are not running, public transport is not running, cars are not running. Is this a right kind of signal? No. So current account surplus, which is a major thing in standard economic textbooks, has all kinds of wrong sense in India. So that put Indian economy in some kind of a peculiar situation, that nothing which is written in the textbook really happened in case of India. It did not boost up our demand. It did not boost up anything for that matter. It's really created all sorts of puzzles in case of balance of payments and etc., which we think about. And a shortage in aggregate supply, the immediate short-run impact, as you can see, sectoral inflation. In some sectors, you will have prices rise, because whenever you put in more money in people's hand, they will go and start buying the essentials at least. So some of the essential prices, maybe agricultural goods prices, will have a tendency to go up. But otherwise, the economy has a problem. As I said, 60% is non-food. That sector is really under shortage of demand. And I'm not sure whether that will go up just because you are increasing money in people's hands. The last thing which I want to say in this case is the long-term scenario. Short-term, you try to pull the economy up. Somewhere you will be successful, somewhere you will not. But long-term, you must put the economy in a sustainable path that Indian economy can sustain it. As we know, any economy's growth depends on how much you save. Whatever you consume today is finished. Whatever you save, you put it in banks or any other medium, which goes back to the economy in the form of funds available to the investors to invest. So more the savings ratio. Apparently, in a world of certainty, more will be investment. In world of uncertainty, questions are there. But nonetheless, a higher savings is good for the economy. And in this kind of a scenario, as I said, apparently people will start savings more. In fact, our savings ratio has gone down tremendously. We're at more than about 36-37% growth savings ratio in 10 years back, which has gone down and come to something like 30% in recent years. So Indians are not savings. And naturally, as you know, in kind of uncertain world and income distribution getting lower, overall savings ratio is not high that way. But savings ratio has to go up in some sense. If savings ratio doesn't go up for some reasons, even if there is uncertainty, you start savings a little bit more, it will not go up dramatically. You need foreigners' money, foreign investment to add to your effort. And this investment in India played a tremendous role, the foreign direct investment in recent years. Now, given this scenario, FDI, whether that will come in or not, is a big question. India still is a better situation than some of the Western nations and maybe East, Southeast Asia, etc. So I don't foresee a major problem of getting FDI. And in fact, as you know, if you look at the world, they are spending so much money is put into the economy for future. So there's a lot of money which is going around, and next 2021 and 22, I think the world demand will pick up, given the amount of money which is being pushed into the economy by the government in all the Western nations and USA and Japan. So that will go up. So the trade scenario will pick up, not immediately, but in recent, in another, say, 1.5 years. FDI, still India's returns are comparatively better. So FDI will pick up also. These in the long run will come. But the major question is, it's just not the growth with which you are important. A jobless growth makes no sense. And that's exactly what was happening. The unemployment tremendously picked up. It went up from this official statistics of something like 8-9% to 27% at some point during the COVID, has come down maybe, and statistics are all unofficial statistics. The government doesn't publish official statistics recently. But the point is very clear that if you want to reduce your joblessness, what is important? Manufacturing sector has to go up, because they create jobs in services too. So altogether, a large amount of employment depends on the manufacturing and the small and medium sector. They are the job creators. And remember, small and medium sectors play an important role because of this subcontracting things which has happened. No company, no big company, what name anywhere, produces everything under one roof. It's all parts and components strewn all around the world. That's exactly what is happening. It's a fragmented scenario, production scenario. China, as you know, controls 22% of this whole, what we call global value chain. Either they assemble or they produce parts and components. And there is a concerted effort all around the world, good, bad, ugly, politics, apolitical, I don't care. But the fact is, this 22% almost has a monopoly power. And countries which are taking advantage of this low wage cost and etc. from China and their efficiency, they are trying to relocate, to reduce the dependence, to reduce the uncertainty. And if India could grab some of it, this fragmented thing, then not only India will benefit, but the small and medium sector, which has a large history in India, especially in automobile sector, pharmaceutical sector, chemical sector, engineering industry. You see so many small, medium industries. They are history. Many of them are inefficient. But if you can put it in the right perspective, especially taking advantage of this tendency of the important major production units in the world to relocate their production of parts, components, and value chain elsewhere from China, that will give a sustainable thing to Indian small, medium industry, which will generate jobs within the industry as well as in services, through transportation, through sales, through marketing, through repair. Is there a proper effort on the part of either the association, the industry lobbies, and the government to get rid of, get hold of this advantage, this vacuum which has been created? Lots of talks are there. In the last budget, we talk, it's a clear mention that India should become an assembly hub. But when it comes to the reality, we lag in various things. We have bureaucratic control somewhere, what we call the so-called the unnecessarily delays in government, in bureaucracy, political interference, lack of infrastructure. We really, if you want to disperse your industries around India, the main thing which you suffer is really bad infrastructure in many cases, roads, power, land problems or whatever. And the last thing which is needed, if you want to put India in the map, that I want to become assembly hub, I want to get into the global value chain, so that, global value chain means the big depends on the small. They do not gobble up the small. Big capital do not eat up the small capital. They have become a symbiotic relation just to take advantage of profit. That's it, a simple calculation. If India wants to take advantage of that, what is the effort Indian government is making? the latest statistics which has come out in some of the world media, most of the relocation has gone to Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia, other Southeast Asian nations. India simply has failed in some sense. Although we talked a lot, we talk a lot about that this is something which we have to do in order for our manufacturing to be boosted up, the small and medium sector to be boosted up. In reality, we lag a lot. And unless we can get over it, the sustainable path to job and growth may not be very easy and ensured. Let me stop here, and if later I can come in again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for your very illuminating discussion, sir. Thank you. Shashwati.
Yeah, I cannot start my video. It is stopped by the host. Okay, sir, thanks a lot for your extremely enriching and engrossing discussion. Basically, you started from what ailed the Indian economy in the pre-COVID times and how the economy is suffering due to the pandemic. And we even touched upon the humanitarian crisis that has evolved due to the various economic policies and the health crisis that we have. Now, sir, we have got a lot of questions, huge lot of questions that has come. So I thought of aggregating the questions in terms of sectors and in terms of the question that has come forth. Now, sir, I would like to ask the questions that were asked in terms of the rural economy. Now, as we know that the loss of 3 months income leave nearly half of our country's population mired in poverty, reversing all the gains that the Indian economy had made since liberalization in the early 90s. Okay. Now, the question here in this case is, what will be the government's policy in this regard? Because during the migrant crisis, we really found out that the government did not at least take up any sort of dynamic policies. But now, since these people are already back to their hinterland, the rural hinterlands, into their villages, what policies should the government take right now, apart from the NREGA and the allocation of around 40 lakh crores that has been given to NREGA? What more can be done? And the question along with this is, at present, the type of demand that we're witnessing in the Indian economy at present, though the demand is very, very low in terms of aggregate, in terms of aggregate sense, is a slight increase in rural demand. So can the government just jump on this slight increase in rural demand, and with all the returned migrants back in the villages, can the government do something in this regard so that we can really pick up the aggregate demand of the economy?
Okay, shall I respond now?
Yeah, sir. Then I'll come to the other questions.
Okay, the first point is agriculture. The first few activities which were allowed in the lockdown is agricultural activities. So remember that whatever relaxation was made in case of India, it's agriculture. But you must also remember that in agriculture, the major part of income now is not generated by agriculture itself. It's non-farm rural activities. Either it's sales, it's repair, it's maintenance, it's some kind of industrial activity there. So if we remember that, so agriculture, you allowed agricultural activities to be carried on to a certain extent. But the non-farm activities largely stopped. That really created the problem. So we have to increase the non-farm activities. And that's exactly what is needed. All kinds of, say, unskilled, different kind of unskilled jobs. So what is needed is, and that I mentioned earlier, and it includes the migrant question as well. When the migrants have come back, there are different levels of skills. The government talked about mapping the skills, they didn't do it. As far as I know, it's all in papers. Skill mapping is not there. So somebody who is good at running a lathe machine is put to digging ponds. But anyway, that's nothing can be done about this, and that generated some income. So one thing is the common answer. The answer is non-farm activities. Right now, the government must increase its infrastructure spending tremendously. Be it creation of, say, even social forestry or water body creation or roads, that's one of the big things, or power plants or whatever, wherever you can put it, or health infrastructure. Right now, you can start it. There, the migrant labor and those who work in non-farm sector can be absorbed. Then gradually, as I said, as the economy picks up, the non-farm sector will pick up. After all, if the agricultural activities pick up, demand from some of this, especially say maintenance, a lot of labor works. If you look at the employment scenario in rural sector, the maintenance and repair that absorbs more than 10% of employment. Obviously, what kind of repair? You have all kinds of agricultural implements which you need to repair. So agricultural activity picks up, will create jobs in this repair and maintenance. And also all kinds of things which you think, right? Starting from your repair of your mobile handset to your anything which goes wrong in your sanitation in your home. So these things will pick up. But the main thing which has to be done is the government infrastructure immediately needed by large amount. Once the rural demand, obviously the rural demand is a major thing. If you look at the spread of consumption base right now, it's rural sector which is creating a big demand nowadays, not only for essential things, but for say mobile handsets or two-wheelers. Big market in the rural sector. So once the agriculture, which has been largely allowed to work on, the non-farm activities pushed up by government investment, this goes up, the rural demand will go up. But remember, as I said, unless you take care of the uncertainty which rules in the economy, as well as the problem of the income distribution getting worse, theoretical calculation in terms of multiplier will simply not give you the right result. So you might think it will work so much. Everybody quotes about a multiplier nowadays, starting from minister to politicians, they talk about multipliers. Those multipliers will simply not work out. But nonetheless, necessary condition is the rural demand will increase if these policies are taken.
Sir, thank you, sir. Now I move from the rural sector to the urban sector. Now you were talking about inequality, you were talking about rising. Yeah, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, now I can hear.
Is it okay?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Now we gradually move from the rural sector to the urban sector.
Again, I
because
can't hear
the migrant crisis
simply vanished. Your voice is not coming.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah. Now, coming to the migrant crisis, which originated from the urban sector. Okay, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. Now, if we can now think of the problem that the government did not take care before, like doing some sort of urban employment program for the urban poor sector, if that can be done right now, some two of the states in India, like Himachal Pradesh and Orissa have already started it. If the whole country could start up with this type of program, sir, can the problem of aggregate demand, where you have the urban poor living, can that be alleviated to a certain extent?
Well, this thing is, this thing is being talked about for quite some time, that we have the rural employment guarantee scheme. Why there isn't an urban employment guarantee scheme? Overnight you cannot start it because you do not have plans. It's something like what's the difference if you have an unplanned thing and direct transfer to them? What's the difference between them? If you do not have a plan, you won't create assets. It just, it's just unplanned things where you put the people and say you work here, work there. If you have a plan, I don't know Orissa and Himachal Pradesh, maybe they have urban sanitation, urban roads, etc. If they put in people, they are fine. If they have a plan, I have no problem. They can immediately start it. But again, government infrastructure is the government which plays the most important. If they want to create assets in urban sector in a planned way and employ the migrant labor or non-migrant labor, doesn't matter. It's a very important and nice thing. But if don't have a plan right now, instead of getting the money lost in somewhere, God knows, as you know, money gets missing in Indian perspective. If you don't want to get the money gets missing in the Indian perspective, a direct money transfer will be better in the urban scenario at the moment.
So now coming to the question regarding the stimulus package. Now we got certain questions like this, like we know that around 85% of the stimulus package that the Indian government had announced was mainly in terms of cash infusions, mainly in terms of cash infusions to the Indian economy, more than 85% of the total package. Now, how can this liquidity measure boost, you have already touched upon this, boost aggregate demand in the economy, because we do not find, like, as you have already said, that even banks are having money, but people are not coming to take it and invest. So what should the government do at this point to deal with this uncertainty climate in the economy, mainly due to the pandemic? And we did have it even before the pandemic, that there was a loss in aggregate, fall in aggregate demand. What right signals should the government send at this point of time such that this uncertain environment is somewhat alleviated?
Well, I'm not a very strong believer in this kind of monetary policy. So if you ask me that why the government went for, as you said, yes, it's about 20 lakh crores. It's almost like 17 lakh crores. Almost that has gone to this kind of a monetary policy, liquidity, creating liquidity in the economy. I don't believe that this kind of a thing will immediately help. As I said, in my whatever I spoke, I had my own skepticism about this. I don't think it's going to work very easily. Number one. Number two, even if it works, it will take time for the monetary multipliers to work. There are two kinds of multiplier. One is the direct transfer, which is a multiplier effect in the economy. The other is a money multiplier. Not money multiplier, the monetary injection and the multiplier generated from that. That takes more time. It's more time consuming. So that's not going to help the economy right now. So either way, the first thing, I don't think it's going to work very well. There's too much faith in this. In the Indian scenario, it might not. And even if it works, it will take a lot more time than what we desire. This much I can say.
Sir, in the initial part of the lecture, you talked about the service sector. You talked about that, yes, we all know that the Indian economy is a service sector driven economy. But we also know that the service sector demand, sir, is a very derived demand. So as you have already rightly pointed out, that if the agricultural sector and the manufacturing sector is not doing well, so the service sector will not really prosper, and so the growth will be in doldrums. Then, sir, regarding the Atmanirbhar policy that the government of India is espousing at this point of time, so does it not boil down to that at this present moment, that is the only thing, a type of self-reliant economy can be the only answer in terms of this deglobalized, if I may use the term today, that we are entering into a deglobalization phase. So can we just say that we are maybe striking the right note in terms of self-reliance and Atmanirbhar at this point of time?
If we talk about the self-reliance, which we talked in the 1980s, that's terrible. That kind of self-reliance is just, it's a coin which doesn't circulate anymore. Simply, I can put it that way. So Atmanirbhar, whatever they talked about, is different from self-reliance we talked in the 1980s. So what is Atmanirbhar? What I figured out, what is meant by this is similar to what's talked in the budget, that we want to become something like a factory of the world, as China is called, that we will manufacturing things which will be consumed by Indians, as well as the others, rest of the world will depend on that also in some form. I talked about the global value chain. So what I suggested is this, that if we can be a part of the global value chain, then the rest of the world will depend on Indian small, medium manufacturers to produce their parts and components. And that will produce some kind of the Indian goods produced in India that caters to Indians as well as the rest of the world. But if you want to have completely go to a protectionist world, that everything I will produce, what's the difference of the 1980s and today? In fact, the protectionist world which United States is preaching nowadays is something which goes, or rather the whole multilateralism is getting a big backseat right now because of this bilateralism and lot of skepticism of multilateralism. But as you can see, the ASEAN is so much successful. It's a multilateral world. The ASEAN shows the rest of the world what some of these 13, 14 countries can do. Tremendous growth, entirely riding on the global value chain technology, global value chain mechanism. So in a sense, Atmanirbhar in 1980s sense is a misnomer. I don't think anybody can go back right now. Deglobalization, easy said than done. If we want to deglobalize, the world economy will shrink. Because you go against the comparative advantage, you go against getting advantage of one country with the other. And remember that the old model of the big eating up the small has changed a lot. So if I can admit that the big capital doesn't always gobble up the small capital, we have to think a little differently. And the world, I think, will think that way to a large extent. And whatever the rhetoric is, will not turn into a completely protectionist world. They will not survive. Or otherwise, the world income will shrink.
So, sir, you're suggesting some sort of a structural change in the Indian economy post-COVID, post-pandemic, in terms of maybe the service sector might be overtaken by some other sector, because that's the way we are portraying the narrative in terms of government policies at present. Are you in any terms trying to suggest that a change in the
No, I'm not saying that the services sector will be overtaken by something else. Agriculture will never. Sorry? Manufacturing has to be strengthened, because the services sector, as I said, most part of services is dependent on manufacturing. If the manufacturing dies, they will die too. So that's not a in a sector which is hanging alone. It's not. So what I said is strengthen the manufacturing sector. I'm not saying that it will overtake the services. It will never, because services are part of it comes from the household. We directly consume services. That will not go away. So taken together, it's important. But largely, say half of the service demand is coming from manufacturing. If you do not strengthen it, the service sector will suffer. It's not a question of overtaking one sector by the other.
Thank you, sir. I would end this session with a last question to you. Like, since we are seeing that the Indian government is really focused on supply side policies more, so we would like to ask at this point of time that what kind of supply side policies are really required, the right ones, to rejuvenate the Indian economy, the right ones? We really see that the type of supply side policies the government is taking is not really doing the trick for us.
I am not sure the government is very clearly saying about the supply side policies. What what they are talking about to a large extent is strengthening the input sector. In fact, the public goods sector. That's the infrastructure. That's where they talk about $5 trillion economy, and the most important ingredient is the infrastructure. And there, both the government and the private sector has to come in. So if you call this supply side, possibly, but think about the Domer's model in growth. Infrastructure creates both demand and supply. So if you strengthen the infrastructure sector, it's not supply side economy alone. Supply side economy is different. That's the monetary policy driven kind of a supply side economy, a tax driven, a tax cut, etc. driven supply side. That's not really the focus of Indian economy at present. That's what I think.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot for answering all our queries that we had, and for an excellent lecture, and a very optimist one also, where we really felt optimist about the Indian economy. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Ajitabu Rai Choudhury and Dr. Shashwati Choudhury, for conducting such a enriching and knowledgeable session. We Would I like to hear from you more, sir, in the future? Now, a time for a short break of 5 minutes. We will return with our next speaker in the next session. Please keep an eye in the WhatsApp group for the session links. Goodbye.